Hey guys, Effie here. Today I'm going to make this card using our Today's Cosmos stamp set and some leftover die cut letters from a previous card. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of watercoloring with our Cosmos. So I arranged them onto my Misty and I have some watercolor paper down in my Misty already. I'm just going to brush on some anti-static powder and then ink up the stamps with some clear sticky embossing ink. I'm going to close the door of my Misty to stamp my watercolor paper with these beautiful cosmos. Then I'll pour on some white embossing powder, and here I just stamped an additional foliage cluster because I always like to stamp a few extra leaves and foliage because I find that I tend to need them more. So after everything was white heat embossed, I'm going to do some wet and wet watercoloring. I wet this big bloom first with some clean water with a medium or large tip water brush, and then I added some fuchsia color burst to the inner petals with a fine tip brush. Then with my larger medium tip brush, I just blended some of that fuchsia pigment out towards the edges of the petals. After I was satisfied with my base fuchsia color, I just went in and added some additional fuchsia color burst to add a little bit of shading. I added additional pigment to the petals that were in the background. So if you look at the cosmos, you can see which petals are in the foreground and which petals are in the background. After you identify those petals, you just want to add some more shading to the petals in the background, and this is going to make your cosmos look real, and you're going to add a little bit more depth that way. Because I really can't leave things alone, I added a second tone to my cosmos. I added Merlot color burst, which is a nice deep red. So using the Merlot, I'm just going to add some additional shading. I just added tiny bits of the Merlot to the areas immediately behind those petals in the foreground, and this is just going to give you that little bit of interest that you need to make your petals actually pop. You don't want to use too much of the color burst all over your petals because otherwise you're just gonna end up with a really dark cosmos flower. If that's the look you're going for, that is great, but for me, I want to make sure that we have a little bit of the fuchsia showing with hints of the Merlot where the shadows should be. I'm going to watercolor my next Cosmo in the same wet and wet watercoloring technique. So I just wet the Cosmos first, and then I added the fuchsia pigment and blended that pigment out to the edges. Then I added tiny bits of Merlot to the inner petals. As you can see, I just add literally a dot of Merlot, and that's all you need. Then I watercolored the leaves. At first I used turquoise, and then I wanted a more greener green, so I kind of went over the turquoise with phthalo green. For the berries, I used the same fuchsia color burst that I used for my cosmos. Since we embossed everything with white embossing powder, you couldn't really see the stems. So I'm gonna die cut everything later, but I didn't want the stems to be almost invisible. So I went over all the stems with some more phthalo green color bursts to make sure that they were a little bit more emphasized. Next, I dried my watercolor panels, and then I die cut all the images using their coordinating dies. I put each of the dies with the cut lines facing down onto the coordinating images, and then I used some Thermoweb purple tape to hold down the dies. Then I ran the watercolor paper panels through my die cutting machine. Next, I'm going to die cut our beautiful geometric circle cover plate die onto an A2 size white cardstock panel. I'm using my Gemini Junior die cutting machine, so I use that extra metal shim because this cover plate die is a bit more intricate and I want everything to get cut out on that first run through. This is one of my favorite cover plate dies in our collection. It's just so elegant and classy, and it looks great even when you just die cut it from white cardstock and put it against a white card base, because you get that beautiful and subtle tone on tone look. And that's what I'm doing here today. I just flipped my die cut over, applied some liquid adhesive to the border, and applied that die cut onto a top folding A2 card base, and look how gorgeous that is. Next, I'm going to use these leftover die cut letters that I used from a previous card. You can see in this video which card I created this from. And in that video, I said that I'll be using these in a later card, and here I am using it because I don't like to waste. I popped each individual letter up using 1/4-inch foam squares, which I just cut in half and applied behind each letter. Then I took this Your die cut from our Sweetheart Wordplate die collection. I die cut it onto white cardstock, and then I just blended on a little bit of our lipstick red ink onto this die cut. This way, that your sentiment will be a little bit more emphasized against that more subtle tone-on-tone white background. Next, I started assembling my florals and foliage onto my card base. I applied some dimensional foam tape behind each element and then arranged and popped them up, creating a beautiful floral scene. For the your sentiment, since the areas of that sentiment are fairly narrow, I just trimmed a very thin, narrow piece of foam tape and I applied a double layer behind some of the more fatter portions of the sentiment. Once I had that double layer on, I just applied it right above the beautiful die cut letters, completing my sentiment. Lastly, I'm going to add some of our glass slipper sequins in varying sizes. For some of the larger sequins, I tucked them behind my flowers or foliage, and I just added the smaller ones in a visual triangle all over the face of my card. And that completes my project for today. I hope you guys enjoyed my card and video. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it on a weekly basis. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.